Um, Thank you very much, Anta. Thank you, Ms. Ivanovic, for the welcome and the remarks, the very thoughtful remarks this morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's fantastic to be able, after 2.5 years, to have a global seminar and a town hall in person. And as I'm sure you're already feeling by talking to each other and reconnecting, there isn't quite anything like being able to have conversations outside Zoom. For one, I will not ask you to get off mute when you raise your hand later in this morning. So we already had 3 productive days of meetings, parent committee meetings of our Macroprudential committee, of our policy development committee, of various other operational committees of the IAIS, and yesterday we had a very productive executive committee which reached a number of key decisions and gave steers. And I think it was a very harmonious meeting. Indeed, so harmonious that we went through all the business that we're supposed to go through. And we even cancelled a Zoom call that we had scheduled for July, because we made such good progress. And I'm sure that part of this is because we had the opportunity to discuss during coffee breaks, side meetings, etc. So although there are a lot of benefits of virtual communication, and we do indeed have a plan to take advantage of that and use virtual platforms more, not least for environmental reasons and cost reasons and inclusion reasons, we do intend to meet in person because it is invaluable. Now, we have, as the IAIS, we're a member-driven organization. Our role is to support our members. And I think we've done that successfully through a global pandemic, and more recently through monitoring the impact on the insurance sector of the events in Ukraine, and currently of the events that we are seeing in terms of inflationary pressures, the possibility of stagflation, events that we again have not experienced in the recent past. Throughout these events, IAS members have worked together, cooperating and collaborating to drive our agenda forward, and supported by the macroprudential frameworks we agreed in 2019 to address weaknesses we identified following the global financial crisis. Now, I'd like to touch briefly on the rapidly changing risk landscape in the insurance sector, as the prospects for the global economy, unfortunately, do look bleaker. First, we have, as I said, we are monitoring the events on Ukraine and the impact that they're having on the insurance sector. So far, very limited direct impact, in part because of the very low insurance penetration in Russia and Ukraine. There have been some impacts on certain lines of businesses, such as aviation and insurance for shipping, but these have been specific and limited. However, broader macro risks, some of which had already started to emerge in response to the pandemic, have increased, including inflationary pressures not seen in decades, driven, at least in part, by supply chain shortages that in turn have led in surges in the prices of goods and, of course, in commodities. We observe also a market rise in corporate and sovereign yields following a prolonged period of low rates that have put pressure on certain insurance business models. Perspectives of growth are being reassessed with potential consequences for credit risk. There is heightened uncertainty, for example, whether the pace of monetary policy tightening we're observing in a number of major economies could lead to a further snapback in inflation expectations and a disorderly adjustment in financial markets. Lastly, we must continue to be alert to cyber risks, precisely as Ante said, especially given the increased extent to which some state actors are using these tools. This places a heightened responsibility on supervisors to ensure that insurers have proper cyber resilient plans in place, and where they underwrite these risks, they do so in a manner in which the risks are well understood and managed, and exclusions are clearly communicated to policyholders. Silent underwriting, of course, being a particular concern in terms of cyber insurance. As we enter the third year of the ICS monitoring period, momentum is growing as we approach the finishing line for developing the standard. In these times of global stress, the importance of a global insurance capital standard has never been more evident. There is plenty of work ahead, but we remain committed to achieving shared success in terms of finalizing the design of an ICS that takes into account differences in business models and risk exposures around the globe, while providing a common language for supervisors to more effectively supervise internationally active insurance groups on a cross-border basis. In parallel to monitoring and developing the final stage of the ICS, we have also made good progress on preparing for the comparability assessment of the ICS with the aggregation method. And I'm glad to say that yesterday evening we launched a consultation on the draft criteria to assess whether the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes to the ICS, which, as some of you may already have seen, lays down the basis for a robust technical comparability assessment. The task of designing this assessment is a complex one, and the reason is simple. The ICS and the aggregation method frameworks are methodologically and conceptually quite distinct. As such, we particularly welcome, we always welcome stakeholder feedback, but we particularly welcome stakeholder feedback in this consultation in order to provide a range of perspectives on this unprecedented area of work and to gauge views on the appropriateness of the draft criteria. And I invite you all to look carefully at the consultation paper and to answer all the consultation questions and provide us with input. Moving on to our focus on effective macroprudential supervision, the standards we agreed in 2019, which set out supervisory requirements for a forward-looking analysis of risks and a range of policy measures that have a macroprudential perspective. I've already mentioned that the frameworks and data collection procedures and analytical tools we developed for the holistic framework have proved extremely useful in helping the IAIS and supporting our members in analyzing and monitoring the various shocks we had since 2019. We have also focused on the comprehensive and consistent implementation of the global macroprudential standards, which are set out in ComFrame, as this is key to the effectiveness of our holistic framework for assessing and mitigating systemic risk. Last year, we published the outcomes of a baseline assessment that indicated that our members have made good progress so far in implementing the holistic framework supervisory material. And work is now well underway to finalize our more intensive target jurisdictional assessments. So these are assessments, deep dives, if you want, in 10 major jurisdictions, major in the sense that they have very big insurance markets, and we look and assess to the extent to which these jurisdictions comply with the ComFrame standards that relate to a macroprudential framework. And indeed, yesterday at EXCO, we were presented with some preliminary results from these assessments. Later this year, we will present those results to the Financial Stability Board, and thereafter, next year, we will publish them for all to see them. In my remarks, I have touched briefly on the rapidly changing risk landscape in which we operate. But there is also a range of other activities in our 2022-2023 roadmap. We have continued to make good progress implementing these various projects. Jonathan will update on our key strategic themes, and then committee chairs will update on the work. Following that, I look forward to answering your questions. In conclusion, as we come together for the first in-person global seminar in 3 years, it is good to benefit from the extra inspiration and energy that comes from interacting directly with colleagues, reminding ourselves of our core goals and objectives, all of which will be key as we head into the final lap for a number of the projects agreed in 2019 and strive to continue to be agile in responding to emerging risks over the horizon. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and Dobro Julko.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. Thank you, Vicky, and let me echo as well your comments about how fantastic it is to be here all together again. 3 years since our last global seminar. It feels like we've been through a little bit of the wilderness and come through the other side, and I can attest that it's been fantastic to see over the last few days the sort of energy and spirit of collaboration with which I think we've all come back together, and that's certainly resulted in some good outcomes over the last few days. But again, fantastic to see you all here. As Vicky said, my job is to do a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through an update on our strategic themes and really giving the sense that we're making progress on all fronts, and then handing over to the parent committee chairs to go into a bit more detail. So I will try and do that whistle-stop tour quite quickly. First of all, climate risk. So of course, this is key and seized by the importance of this topic for the insurance sectors in particular. We are moving forward quickly in this area with the help of our climate risk steering group, chaired by Daniel Wang from Singapore. And we're taking forward work on 3 fronts. So firstly, taking forward work to ensure supervisors are clear on the climate-related links in our standards and providing some guidance on that. Secondly, supporting our members as they undertake climate risk scenario analysis. And thirdly, data gathering to better understand climate risks. So Daniel will share more about these areas of focus in the Q&A part of our town hall session. And lastly, to add, I can add from our discussions of yesterday also a sense that really we need to perhaps add work on looking at climate risk-related protection gaps to our areas of work going forward as well. Second area of focus is cyber risk, and Ante touched on this, where we really are using our vantage point as a standard setter to assess the risks to the sector and developing material to support supervisors with respect to risks associated with IT third-party outsourcing and insurance sector resilience, cyber resilience issues more broadly. And both Gary and Dieter will touch on those. Thirdly, market conduct issues are very much part of the IAIS's focus as well. We like to make sure we have a balance between financial stability, prudential, and conduct issues. So we are focused on how supervisors can help improve consumer outcomes. And to this end, later this month, I'm happy to say, we will publish a report on the use of key indicators to proactively monitor conduct risks, so a more proactive approach to market conduct supervision and to enable more timely supervisory responses to emerging conduct risks and trends. And Gary will also cover this. Next, on digital transformation, good progress as well. And our FinTech Forum, under the new leadership of our ExCo champion for FinTech issues, Petra Hekelmar from AOPA, who chairs this platform, which provides a real forum for technical experts from insurance supervisory authorities to share perspectives. And the forum has recently shared with members a range of deep dive studies into various aspects of digital innovation, and I'm happy to say that we'll be publishing a summary note, a public summary note, a little bit later this year, and I'm sure Petra will be happy to go into a bit more detail on that during the Q&A session as well. Also, as part of our digital transformation theme, we are looking at key trends and developments in the deployment of supervisory technology by insurance supervisors, so SupTech, and happy to say that we are going to be jointly developing a note together with the Financial Stability Institute of the BIS and our partners, the Access to Insurance Initiative, around SupTech and our members' responses to SupTech developments. Next, I can flag that we continue to build on our long-championed commitment to financial inclusion issues. And our Financial Inclusion Forum, which we set up last year, has continued to grow in strength, and our partnership with the Access to Insurance Initiative has continued to flourish and allowed us to deliver a number of supervisory dialogues to support our members, particularly from emerging market and developing economies, to develop sustainable, inclusive insurance markets. And then lastly, but certainly not least, as we put out in our statement last year, the IAIS is very much committed to embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in our work. So, under the leadership of Helen Rowell, who is our new ExCo champion on DE&I, we are undertaking a stocktake on both the insurance sectors and supervisors' activities to support DE&I in the insurance sector. And Gary will go into a bit of more detail on this as well, and I know Helen will be available to answer questions. But I also want to add to that as an organization, we also recognize that we need to walk the talk, if you like, on DE&I, and so we have also started work to embed DE&I into the way we work at the IAIS, and therefore we've started work to assess changes needed to make our association even more inclusive. So this is quite a deliberative process. We'll be going through various steps, including engagement with members and stakeholders, but we'll provide a more detailed update when we meet at our annual conference in November. And then lastly, just to mention a little bit about our internal focus over the last year. And as I hope you've noticed, we've made quite some steps forward in terms of a refreshed brand and website for the IAIS, which we launched in March. I think the new brand more effectively, I think, conveys the IAIS's organizational identity, but also its place as part of the global financial architecture, and I think a sense of the new energy which has gripped the association as we come out of the pandemic and focus on building back better. So I hope you enjoy the new website as well. So to conclude, and whilst moving to the chairs of our parent committees who will provide some updates, I do want to thank all of them for their tireless efforts. Chairing a parent committee is not an easy job, I know from my old days, and it's a lot of work on top of your day job. So I really do want to thank all of our parent committee chairs for their tireless efforts and the support they provide in ensuring that the IAIS can deliver on its ambitious work program and uphold its mission on a day-to-day basis. So thank you. And but if I can have one last word, it is to note that this is the last meeting for our EXCO, third EXCO Vice Chair, Suzette Fulkersang. We got to say goodbye to Suzette at the EXCO meeting yesterday, but I do want to add a few words of my own to say a huge thank you to Suzette for all she's done for the IAIS. I'm very glad she's moving to the IMF, so she's still going to be part of our work, but thank you, Suzette, for your energy, your commitment, your warmth, and for being such a clear voice for emerging markets in the work of the IAIS. With that, thank you very much, and I'll now turn over to Dieter. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, yeah. Thank you very much, Jonathan, and allow me first to join other speakers by thanking Hanfa and Ante for inviting us to this wonderful city of Dubrovnik. Thanks for that, Ante. Now, I'll be beginning my update by saying that, perhaps unsurprisingly, MPC has been closely monitoring how geopolitical events and developments in financial markets, also already hinted towards by Ante, have been impacting our global insurance sector. So supported by our updated IAIS risk dashboard, which we use to monitor a comprehensive set of financial indicators, both MPC and EXCO held regular discussions on these external developments. We've also exchanged views on supervisory measures taken, and next to that, we have also discussed steps that we should or could take in case certain events would further materialize. We'll of course be continuing to closely monitor the situation as a part of our macroprudential and financial stability mandate at IAIS. Now, as several of you will probably have noticed, we've launched also this year a global monitoring exercise data collection. And in the meanwhile, we have received data from the participating insurers. The data arrived around early May. So earlier this week, both EXCO and MPC decided on the scope of the collective discussion that we will hold this year in September. The collective discussion, as most of you know, intends to focus on a set of global insurers identified by, amongst others, systemic risk criteria. And the idea is to trigger a discussion amongst supervisors about the identified risks, about the evolutions and trends we see in the global insurance sector, and about potential supervisory responses in case we deem those necessary. This will, of course, be complemented by an equally important assessment of the broader macroprudential themes that confront today's insurance sector. These overarching themes will focus, amongst others, on the current macroeconomic environment, which, as we all know, is characterized by high inflation and low projected growth figures. We will also focus on climate risk and on the impact of private equity ownership and the related business model. You may also recall that one of the outcomes of the collective discussion of last year was to perform a deep dive analysis into cyber risk, which will be the focus of our GMAR special report this year. Cyber risk, unfortunately, has been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, so the GMAR report will cover the developments and risks in the cyber underwriting market. We will focus on cyber resilience for insurers, and we will try to assess the financial stability implications and the future of cyber risk monitor in our global monitoring exercise. I would encourage everyone to look out for our publication, which is foreseen towards the end of this year. Importantly, this year as well, the collective discussion will bring together the different components of the holistic framework. So not only the findings from the global monitoring exercise, but also the key findings from the assessments we made on the implementation by the jurisdictions of the holistic framework supervisory measures. And bringing all these elements together, our output will be reported to FSB, as Vicky already highlighted. As such, at the end of the year, FSB will decide and take a critical decision, I would say, in consultation with the IAIS and the national supervisory authorities on whether to discontinue or to re-establish the annual GSI identification. So as IAIS, we will provide our recommendation to the FSB based on the progress made on the first 3 years of the implementation of the holistic framework. We will inform the FSB of our assessment and of both the benefits and the challenges of this framework. We will compare it to the old GSII framework, and we will also highlight next steps and areas of further work, taking a more forward-looking perspective. This could also include possible changes to the individual insurer monitoring methodology, and we will try to assess whether changes are needed also by the end of this year. I'm looking forward in that respect to tomorrow's session on the holistic framework, where we will discuss implementation progress. I would also like to invite all stakeholders present here to our holistic framework roundtable, which will be held on the 19th of July, and where your input on the effectiveness of the holistic framework will also be sought. Turning to my last topic, the development of liquidity metrics. After 2 years of development and public consultations, I'm glad to announce we're in a final phase of developing these metrics, which will serve, as most of you know, as ancillary indicators in the individual insurer monitoring as part of our global monitoring exercise. These metrics will be based on an exposure-based approach as well as on a stressed cash flow approach, and more details to follow in our liquidity metrics document, which will be published also later this year. So that concludes my MPC update, and I'm happy to pass the floor to Gary, who will update you on the work of the PDC.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone. Well, you always say that, maybe not everyone, but nevertheless, it's good to be out, about, experiencing life again, and in such a beautiful location. Ante, thank you. This is incredible. We've got our work cut out for us. At the IAIS, I think we're up next. So a tour on a historic boat of a historic place is a tough one to top. So we will put our shoulder to the wheel and see what we can do. And thank you to Dieter for the introduction. I don't know if he knows this, but he was a panelist on our DC. We had our DC forum, our international forum in DC, And it was moderated by one of my very favorite people in the world, Beth Dwyer, who was the superintendent of the Rhode Island department, our small neighbor to the south. But that panel actually ranked as the top-rated panel after a polling from a poll that was done from of the panel. So kudos to Beth, to Dieter for making it such a success. It was a really interesting conversation. The Policy Development Committee and its subcommittees have made good progress on several pieces of supporting material related to the IAIS strategic themes, as well as the Insurance Capital Standard. One of those areas is sound remuneration. The principles and policies are an important component of effective corporate governance and risk management, in particular in terms of eliminating incentives towards excessive risk-taking and aligning employee incentives with the longer-term interests of the business. The Governance Working Group has just concluded a phase of exploratory work to identify whether the insurance sector, whether there are outstanding issues with respect to remuneration in the insurance sector. This could be, and which of these could be beneficially addressed by further IAIS work. We'll update stakeholders on next step for further work on remuneration once plans for the 2023 projects are settled later this year. On another topic, supervisors are increasingly looking to adopt more forward-looking and outcomes-based approaches to conduct risks. The Market Conduct Working Group surveyed IAIS members on supervisory approaches and challenges relating to using data and key indicators for conduct supervision, as Jonathan earlier noted. A report on this work will be made public in the following weeks. As Jonathan also noted, GWG and the MCWG are also looking at the connection between diversity, equity, and inclusion, and aspects of governance and conduct and culture of insurers. IAIS members were surveyed earlier this year on the state of D&I in the insurance sector in their jurisdictions and supervisory initiatives to promote DE&I in the insurance sector. A report on this work will be published later this year as well. On another topic that will be talked about a lot through the next couple of days, the Operational Resilience Task Force is developing an issues paper that aims to identify and assess factors and developments impacting the insurance sector operational resilience, setting out examples of how supervisors are approaching these issues and considering lessons learned through the COVID-19 pandemic. Its focus is on cyber resilience, IT third-party outsourcing, and business continuity planning, and it will be published for consultation in the coming months. On the front of climate-related risks, the PDC considered recommendations from the Climate Risk Steering Group for limited changes to ICP guidance and the development of supporting material, which will be consulted on next year. While insurers should already be seeking to integrate climate risk in their enterprise risk management, and the ICPs are sufficiently broad to capture climate risk, the IAIS believes further guidance would help. In March, EXCO agreed to pursue a differentiated treatment for investments in infrastructure, debt, and equity in the ICS. The Capital Solvency and Field Testing Working Group, or otherwise known as the CSFWG, is undertaking further work with the aim to finalize the design and calibration of these two asset classes early in 2023. And regarding strategic equity, CSFWG is continuing the analysis on whether a differentiated treatment could be granted, and if so, under what conditions. And then lastly, on ICS more broadly, the COVID-19 crisis again highlighted the relevance of global group capital standard to provide a common language for group solvency discussions. The global insurance capital standard is even more important in a period of global stress in the insurance sector. And despite our operational challenges of the pandemic, the IAIS appreciates the very good engagement with those groups taking part as volunteers, who through their participation have the opportunity to help shape the standard. This year, we also had the second year of the ICS discussions among group-wide supervisors in supervisory colleges, as well as the first ICS Global Roundtable of Supervisors. Both of these have provided really valuable input and feedback to further enhance the ICS. Later this month, the IAIS will publish the updated ICS specifications and confidential reporting package for year 3 of the monitoring period. I would like to just pause for a moment too, and over the course of the last couple of years, express my appreciation to the staff of the Secretariat that support the work of the PDC. It is a group of talented professionals who are kind and patient, and I am very thankful for the expertise that they demonstrate. It certainly contributes to the value and the credibility of the work that we do. With that, I will turn things over to my colleague Peter for an update on the work of the IAC.
Thank you very much, Gary. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. First of all, I would join previous speakers in just thanking our friends from HAMFA for having us here at such a wonderful place and for organizing such a great event. Thank you very much. So what you need to know about the work of the IAC over the last 6 months or so, it has been again a challenging and very exciting period, of course, which is not surprising because we are very active in the standard setting, as you just have heard, and in the macroprudential area, and sooner or later, everything is also about implementation of those standards and standards we create here. So we worked on all of the 4 pillars that are part of our IAS implementation strategy and try to put those into action. The first part, of course, is the implementation, monitoring, and assessment part. The IAS evaluates our members' levels of observance with the core principles, COMFRAME, under the Coordinated Implementation Framework Strengthened Assessment Program. And that includes mainly, for the time being, 3 main elements. The first one is about the peer reviews. Here we we expect to publish peer reviews on the implementation of the standards on supervisory review and reporting, together with an assessment of our standard on preventive and corrective measures and sanctions, so to speak, ICPs 9 and 10 by the end of the year. And the next peer review that will start early next year will consider supervisory practices in the area of enterprise risk management, so ICP 16. Our peer reviews aim to provide a robust assessment of members' efforts to implement our agreed international standards. Secondly, the member assessment programs. Here I can report that we have finalized shortly our assessment of Mexico, and the review of Albania will start very soon. Lastly, we have, and this was mentioned already, our targeted jurisdictional assessments of the implementation of the holistic framework, supervisory material that is now going on in the 10 jurisdictions and close to being finalized, representing all the major insurance markets. This all will get into the comprehensive report on the implementation of the holistic framework, which, as was already mentioned, we will deliver to the FSB later this year. Second, the IAS promotes effective supervisory cooperation by facilitating information exchange amongst insurance supervisors, mainly through its multilateral memorandum of understanding. And in the first half of 2022, I'm happy to say that we have got 3 new signatories: the Albanian Financial Supervisory Authority, the Massachusetts Division of Insurance, and the Central Bank of Aruba. So now we are at 79 supervisors that are signatories to the IAS MOU, representing over 3/4 of the global insurance premium. Third part of our activities is about capacity building. We continue to work closely with our implementation partners to support supervisors in building the necessary skills to advanced observance of the IAS supervisory material. In particular, the Access to Insurance initiative supports exchanges on topics that address financial inclusion and sustainable development. Through its A2I Connect platform, it offers online training to insurance supervisors in a wide range of topics, including emerging and accelerating trends. A particularly exciting initiative is the joint project of the IAS, the A2I, and the International Actuarial Association on an actuarial skills training course, which was offered for the first time now also in Spanish to 50 supervisors. And I have to tell you that it was heavily oversubscribed. We had more than double the interest in that. And similarly, in close cooperation with the Financial Stability Institute of the BIS, we deliver training programs such as the First One initiative, which touches upon the building blocks of insurance supervision. Our fourth and final pillar encompasses our forums and issuing application papers that should provide flexible platforms for sharing supervisory practices and supervisory guidance, respectively. Our forums provide platforms for supervisors to discuss and share examples of best practice on issues including fintech and retirement income and pensions. And we also have the Financial Inclusion Forum, which in this year was considering financial education, design of need-based products, and the inclusive insurance data. And in the next period, it will talk about inclusive insurance regulatory frameworks, climate risk, and protection gaps. And in 2022, the IAC has an ambitious agenda with the setup of 3 new fora. First, we have the remandated Supervisory Forum. Secondly, the Risk-Based Solvency Implementation Forum to support the implementation of risk-based solvency regimes, and the Financial Crime Forum. We look forward to extending our ideas based on these topics. So you see, there's a lot to do. I find the work very exciting. Looking forward to work on all these topics in the future. And that completes my report on the IAC, and it's my pleasure to hand over to Suzette.
Thanks, Peter. And I would also like to thank you and your team for hosting us in this wonderful country of yours. Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all. So the focus on the needs of the supervisors from the emerging markets and developing economies is growing within the IAIS. This includes financial stability issues and the implementation and assessment and support topics that Peter just covered. In my capacity as the EXCO Vice Chair for EMD issues, I will provide a brief summary of the activities undertaken by the IAIS in support of its EMD members. The IAIS has strengthened its ongoing work with EMD supervisors through regular EMD calls, close coordination with regional coordinators, and fruitful cooperation with the implementation partners. The IAIS in this year approved the establishment and the mandate of a risk-based solvency implementation forum to address the particular needs of EMD members for practical advice on the journey to modernize their solvency frameworks. In the first half of this year, EMD members participated in a workshop on supervisory needs, in addition to implementing risk-based solvency and advancing observance to IAIS supervisory materials, cross-cutting topics such as climate, cyber, digitalization, and financial inclusion sit at the top of the supervisory priorities and the regional agendas. As the IAIS EXCO Vice Chair for EMD issues, I ensure that the issues identified by the EMD members are raised at EXCO meetings and inform the development of the IAIS roadmap. Furthermore, the close cooperation with our implementation partners, the A2II, the FSI, and the Toronto Centre, played a crucial role in pursuing the IAIS high-level goals, supporting EMDs with capacity-building initiatives, dialogues on topical issues, as well as research and guidance. EMD supervisors have worked closely with the implementation partners to identify their local and regional needs, as well as to design their work plans. For example, the A2II published a supervisory handbook on key performance indicators. This was developed jointly with the supervisors from the sub-Saharan African region. It provides tailored guidance on implementing, analyzing, and using prudential soundness, market conduct, market development, and sustainable development goals indicators in pursuing more effective supervision. In the first half of this year, regional meetings were held in the sub-Saharan African region, offshore and Caribbean region, and the Latin American region. These regional meetings allow the supervisors from the regions to discuss regional issues and develop their agendas and work plan. And these engagements have reached over 150 supervisors. As I step down from my role as the Vice Chair, I'm confident that the IAIS is focusing on supporting EMD jurisdictions to develop inclusive insurance mandate markets. The work remains at the core of the IAIS mandate, with these supervisory exchanges facilitating the sharing of valuable information between EMD jurisdictions to support better supervision of the insurance sector across the IAIS broad membership. Lastly, I would in particular like to thank Manuela and Carlos for their support for me as the Vice Chair. And I would also like to thank Jonathan for his kind words earlier. I don't know why you want to make me emotional on this day, but thanks, Jonathan, and I'm handing back to Jonathan. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Suzette. Wonderful. So now we've reached that part of the town hall session where we turn to you in the audience for questions to our leadership team here. We have some roving microphones in the room, so please wait for these to get to you before speaking so that we can hear you properly. And if you could remember when you ask your question to also give your name and the name of the organization that you come from. But we very much look forward to the questions and having our first in-person engagement again. I mean, before we get started, just to say we have a few pre-submitted questions. So I'll be calling on a few people to start with, and then once we're through those, we'll open it to the floor and it'll be hands up. So let me first kick off with, I know we have a question or two from the American Council of Life Insurers, and I think we have Robert Neal with us towards the back there. Robert, if you can stand up, put your hand up, and they'll bring the microphone to you. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. Good morning, Robert Neal with the American Council of Life Insurers. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all for your excellent reports this morning, very informative. We always appreciate these dialogues, obviously critical to have ongoing engagement with industry and with our supervisors to make sure that standards and rules that come out are thoughtful and effective. I wanted to talk a little bit today about your work on diversity, equity, and inclusion in particular. ACLI has been active domestically in promoting DEI through our economic empowerment and racial equity initiatives, and a recent focus on impact investing in underserved communities, in particular low-income housing. So our CEO, Susan Neely, has been very active in supporting members that are interested in that, and sends her regards, and would love to have been here, but our board meetings are actually going on this week, so looks forward to meeting with some of you in Chile in the fall, hopefully, as JIFIA will also be meeting in the fall of the Global Federation, and she serves as vice president of JIFIA, so as you know. JIFIA has also played a proactive role in surveying members on their DEI initiatives and exploring protection gaps and particular impacts on women. We found that women are disproportionately impacted specifically through COVID in some of our research, and so that's an initiative that ACLI has been very engaged on. We applaud the good work of our FIDES colleagues in Latin America who steered the JIFIA work and our JIFIA survey on these issues. We hope our research will be valuable to you and your work, and that we can work collaboratively going forward. So my question would be, how do you anticipate engaging with stakeholders in the coming months? I know you referenced some of your work earlier. Anything you can report on that has developed over the course of the week in your committee meetings? And would just say that we hope to have a face-to-face on these important issues in the fall. As I said, JIFIA leaders will be there, and we look forward to working together with you. And then lastly, I would also be remiss if I didn't ask a question about your work on ICS. We're all digesting the comparability consultation. We're also digesting the Insurance Policy Advisory Committee report that recently came out from the IPAC that supports the work of the Federal Reserve Board in the US. and we would encourage consideration of the suggestions and conclusions that were put forth in that report. And as we digest the comparability principles, I'm sure we'll have many questions, and we look forward to contributing to the consultation in the weeks ahead, of course, through August. So that shall be interesting. But thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks very much, Robert. And I think what we'll do with the ICS question, because I do know we have another question on ICS coming up from one of our other stakeholders as well, so we might deal with that in the round. But on your DE&I question, I'm very happy to hand over to our new DE&I champion, Helen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Robert, for the question, and also thanks to ACLI and GAFIA for the important work that they're doing in this area, which I was very pleased to discuss with Susan nearly a couple of months ago. As you noted, I think the IAS is very conscious that engagement with industry and other stakeholders is a very important part of the work we do on DE&I. We need to be inclusive in our approach to that, and that includes getting feedback and input from the wide range of stakeholders that are relevant to that work. You did mention the importance of achieving thoughtful, workable standards and rules, and I think it's really important to note that at this point the IAS is not contemplating any standards or rules in this area. We're really in the information gathering and prioritisation and sort of planning the work phase, and we may consider down the track other specific actions, but at this stage what we're really trying to do, primarily through the work of the Governance Working Group and the Market Conduct Working Group, is to get a better understanding of the work and initiatives that are already in train, both within member jurisdictions but also across the broad range of stakeholders that are actively undertaking work in this area, so that we can understand what is already being done and what we may be able to leverage, learn more about, in particular, what the insurance sector itself is doing to embed D&I in its governance processing and its approach to dealing with consumers, so that we can then make some informed and considered decisions about where best the IAS work can add value. We are very much taking the approach of trying to integrate D&I concepts and thinking into the work that is already in train within the IAS to the extent that we can, which is why the work is primarily being led, as I said, through the Governance Working Group and the Market Conduct Working Group. So, as I said, information gathering, we haven't made any particular decisions yet about the direction and focus that the specific work by the IAS will take. We have gleaned some information through the stakeholder survey, which Gary mentioned will be made public a little later, and we will also have a deeper discussion on this at the September EXCO meeting, where we'll form some more specific decisions about the way forward and next steps. In between now and then, we do want to undertake some roundtables and conversations with various industry stakeholders, and we would be very pleased to have ACLI, and GAFIA as part of those conversations. So thank you again for your question.
Thank you very much, Helen. And now I'll call upon Dennis Snoodhoek from Geneva Association. Dennis, I think you're over. Yeah, there's Dennis.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for allowing me to ask a question, for inviting us to this fantastic place here. I have a question for Petra as the FinTech champion of the IAIS. Petra, artificial intelligence applications in insurance continue to receive a lot of interest from the industry itself, from regulators, but also from policymakers outside the insurance sphere. The question is, how is the IAIS liaising with those policymakers and other regulators across the globe on possible regulatory initiatives and good practices around regulating AI? I mean, we had this discussion at our recent Progress seminar in March, which I think was really insightful, and it was also very much in light of developments on a European level. There are developments going on in other places in the world, and it would be really interesting to get a bit of an insight as to how you are bringing forward the industry perspectives to other regulatory and policy setting bodies. So thank you very much for that.
Yes. Well, good morning, everyone. And I do need to start my response today with first joining everyone who's thanking Hanva and also the whole group that is Hanva and all the people involved in making this such a very nice week here in Dubrovnik, lovely city of Dubrovnik. So thanks for that. Dennis, thank you also for the question. I think it's a fair question. It's an important question because there's a lot indeed happening. There's also a lot of interest in what is happening in AI, and at the same time, I sometimes feel that in some structures, at political level, people are only discovering now that insurers are doing something with data, apparently, and they ask me if I feel that's a risk, and so I think it's very good that also supervisors, we reach out to stakeholders in those areas and explain that it's been decades that insurers have been working with risks, and in a way it's natural that you see, particularly when it comes to use of data, you see new technologies developing. Now, if you look at the FinTech Forum, the really nice part of being able to champion this group is that we're not standard setting, we're not working towards policy, we're really sharing as a supervisory community with each other what we see happening in the market. And we did so in the last year, and when I say did, I mean I stepped in and it was already a very active group. I'm really happy with the work streams and the work stream leads. They were looking into data use, data analysis, machine learning, but also AI, of course, use of APIs and blockchain. We managed to actually have 3 work streams come up with great reports that we shared with the supervisory community, and we are now drafting that into a document we can publish, as Jonathan already said. But I can say already, do a sneak preview on what we did on AI and machine learning. And I think the first thing we did was we looked into the question to what extent do insurers exert sufficient oversight and control over the machine learning models they have in order to both maintain performance but also manage the risks. Moreover, we looked into to what extent does have senior management, do they have the right information to actually have a judgment on whether or not that is happening properly. That was the first question. The second that we looked into was is to what extent are insurers able to really source high quality data, both external data, internal data, and to support all these ML applications, because good data going in is key for good information coming out. We moreover ask the question, is there proper governance, are there controls, and are the IT systems up for it? And I think that is a very operational question, but also key. And finally, and I think this is a very important part of use of ML, is we looked into the controls that are in place to measure but also deal with risks for bias, for discrimination, and financial exclusions. Now, that we shared, and as you can hear, it was very much focused on what we see in the insurers part of the market. And I think an overall conclusion could be that we see that most of the time when these tools are used, they're used to improve pricing and profitability of existing business. So it's not so much used yet to try with the technology to go into new areas of risk. It's also used by by the same structure. So within the governance, we see the same committees, we see the structures that were there, but they now are adapting to the use of ML learning. So I think overall that is what we see now. Please, if you sit in the room and you think, well, we're actually going really beyond that and doing totally new things, do talk to me over the coffee break. We'll be happy to hear. At the same time, we will be moving forward as well. We will be looking at more blockchain cases. We will continue our work on AI. I think this is an area where we need to think about maybe doing more than just sharing practices. Maybe we do need to think about what it means for supervision. And moreover, we will be looking into subtech. Again, going back to what I started, I think once we are able to publish a summary, we can further reach out to stakeholders. I have, I think, a good open dialogue with Geke Feiter at the GFIA, and you know, Dennis and I, we know how to find each other as well. I think that's very important that we keep each other up to speed here, but also that we do talk to the political level and exchange at the extent to which we see risks that we can deal with within the frameworks we already have, or whether there are indeed risks emerging that would need more attention and maybe even new regulation. But at this point, we are not, I would say we are not at the stage that I think more is needed outside the current frameworks, but we do need to make good use of the frameworks we have. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Petra. We'll turn to our next question, which is from the GFIA, Global Federation of Insurance Associations, GFIA. I think we have Don with us. Don Fergeron. Yeah, great to see you, Don.
Thank you. She came out of nowhere. Good morning, Jonathan. Good morning, colleagues. Just to add to others how nice it is to be here in person. Somebody said recently it's nice to be anywhere in person these days. But living in the real world and the virtual world, I have two questions, Jonathan. I'll let you direct them. One on climate. But after 20 hours of traveling last evening, I had to give a speech to a conference back in Canada of regulators on climate. So we're going to have to learn how to navigate the real world and the virtual world at the same time. We talk a lot about climate. We've enjoyed the exchanges with the IAIS over the last several years as this has grown in importance. And the question is really around a couple of principles that you're probably tiring hearing from us about, but we obviously feel them quite important, and that's the principle of proportionality and the principle of consistency as it relates to your approach to climate. And so on the issue of proportionality, we believe that it's important to recognize and be cognizant when we apply supervisory responses that we recognize the size of an institution, the nature of its business, the complexity of its operations. As well, when it comes to rules and requirements, they should be, to the extent possible, consistent and aligned at the regional, subnational, national, and international level. So the question is, Jonathan, I guess twofold. One, how the IAIS aims to contribute to an effective approach to climate risk, and secondarily, how will the response to the ISSB's public consultation take into account these two principles? So that's the question on climate. The second question relates to the ICS, and it's more a process-related question. And I think all of us would acknowledge the good process is a big contributor to good outcomes. And on the issue of process as it relates to the International Capital Standard, there's a growing concern that the IAIS might not be able to effectively engage stakeholders once you've received the results of the impact assessment and then feedback from the industry. And obviously serious issues, if left unaddressed, would ensue. So the question in short form is how do you plan in terms of process and timetable on engaging further with stakeholders following the impact assessment and the feedback you're going to get from the industry before the adoption of the ICS. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Don. So I think for the climate question, we will hand over to Daniel Wang, as I said, who's from the Monetary Authority of Singapore, but the chair of our Climate Risk Steering Group. And then for your question around the ICS project, I think Vicky will take that one. So over to you first, Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Don, for the question. Maybe I'll take a step back and then zoom into some of the finer details of your climate-related questions. So climate change is a global challenge, and therefore it's essential that we at IAIS, together with all of you in this room, representing your industries and your firms, tackle this risk at a global level. So by definition, if we are doing it at a global level, the principles of consistency, comparability, transparency, and certainly comprehensiveness as well, I would say, should be imbibed as we tackle this formidable challenge together. So last year we created the Climate Risk Steering Group, and you've heard from Jonathan. We formed 3 work streams and areas of focus: a gap analysis of the insurance core principles, scenario analysis, and on data gathering. So all of that work is aimed at promoting a consistent global approach to tackling this issue and to support our supervisor members as they seek to better assess and address the risks from climate change. Through that process of capacity enhancing and sharing of good practices, I think that will bring some convergence, if not greater convergence, in terms of supervisory practices, which in turn, at the national level, will impact licensed insurers. So let me go into a bit of detail. So the CRSG work is, as I mentioned, we've done that gap analysis of the insurance core principles. We regard climate risk as a driver of existing risks, and therefore we see the importance of integrating it into existing processes and practices at the firm level. We have concluded that the ICPs are sufficiently broad to cover climate risk. Hence, there will only be a limited number of changes made to the ICP guidance to make it more explicit that supervisors should be requiring insurers to incorporate climate-related risks into their day-to-day operations, such as in governance, enterprise risk management, and in their disclosures. So we also expect that there will be further supporting material to guide our members to understand and also supervise the risks that I mentioned in those areas. Of course, any kind of changes or revisions to the ICPs or the ICP's guidance will be publicly consulted, and we expect to issue those public consultations sometime next year. In the area of scenario analysis, we are, of course, very actively supporting our members to address practical challenges within this emerging field. In fact, the first of this many sessions will commence later today. For data, we added climate data elements to the global monitoring exercise this year. These elements will become a regular feature of our annual assessment of insurance sector risks, and it will provide, I hope, a global baseline of climate risk data for the insurance sector. So early next year, we will also consider whether to collect climate data directly from individual insurers. And we are actively engaging with stakeholders on what data would be best. So in fact, this is the part where you can play a role, where we will want your input into what data should be helpful to be collected, and have engaged in that dialogue to learn from each other. So Dawn, on your question on the ISSB, IAIS is responding to the ISSB's exposure draft consultation. Once the details of the ISSB scopes are clear and finalized, we will consider whether there's any additional insurance-specific disclosures that may be needed. However, I also note that the ISB already includes sector-specific guidance, so there will be a high bar for any additional disclosure that will be required beyond what ISSB already provides. But that process is still under consultation, and we will want to work very closely and coordinate with the ISSB as they finalize their work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel, and over to you, Vicky.
Yes, thanks very much for the question, Don. I mean, first, I should say that just remind people about the purpose of the monitoring period that we are now in mid-cycle on. And the purpose was to have a 5-year period during which we could monitor the performance of the reference ICS with a stable design. But the reason that we put the ICS in monitoring is actually to try to improve it and to learn lessons for how it behaves during different economic periods. And of course, we have had a number of unusual periods and market shocks that have happened helpfully in that particular project, and helpfully in terms of other impacts that have taught us things about the ICS. So we do intend to learn lessons, and we do intend and therefore, to the extent that these lessons lead to changes, these will be included in our consultation paper for the ICS as a PCR, prescribed capital requirement, which is scheduled to happen mid next year, mid 2023. There will be a consultation period, and we will very, very carefully examine, and we will reach out to stakeholders before we make decisions in 2024 to finalize the ICS. And these decisions will also be supported by an economic impact analysis. And all the work that has been done, going back to Robert's question, by other organizations about economic impacts, impacts on guaranteed products, etc., will be taken into account as part of both the consultation paper on the ICS as PCR, but also as part of finalizing the ICS and as part of the economic impact assessment. So the short answer to the question is yes, we do plan to engage. In terms of particularly some of the issues raised about the ICS on the APAC report, I want to highlight, and that is extremely important for the key reason, actually, one of the key reasons that it is very, very important that groups that are going to be subject to the ICS when it gets developed, or indeed the aggregation method, if it's deemed comparable, do volunteer and do become, do report as part of the monitoring period, and we have very good participation, in order to allow us to observe the behavior, but also to complete the additional reporting. And you will see in the templates that are going to be launched additional reporting, which will allow us to look at the gaps between the reference ICS and these additional reports that particularly look at discounting effectively, and also the treatment of equity outside the reference ICS. And that will enable us to see whether there are certain changes that we might want to do in these aspects as part of the consultation next year. So I really encourage you to, those groups that are part of the monitoring, to carefully continue to provide us with data on the reference ICS, but also to complete this additional reporting, because that will be crucial for any changes that we might do. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Now I have some questions from Mary Frances Monroe from the IIF. Mary Frances, there we go. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you for holding this this town hall today. Cyber risk is a key topic for the IIF, both in terms of resilience and also cyber risk underwriting. So I have a question that has two parts to it, one related to resilience and one related to underwriting. So first on resilience, I'd be interested in understanding how the work of the Operational Resilience Task Force is coordinated with the other financial sector standard setters and the FSB in light of some significant cross-sectoral linkages relating to cyber risk. And then on the underwriting side, I know that Dieter mentioned that there's a forthcoming issue of the GMAR that will be devoted to cyber risk underwriting, but I thought perhaps we could have some preliminary thoughts on how the IAIS sees the current state of the cyber risk insurance and reinsurance markets and any developments that you've noted since the 2020 IAIS report. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary Frances. So we'll split this. So Gary will be able to talk about our work on the supervisory practices on cyber resilience issues, and Dieter will talk a little bit about the GMAR special topic look on cyber underwriting. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, you bet, Jonathan. Thank you for the question. Mary Frances, as Jonathan said, I'll defer to the latter half of that to my colleague Dieter on the GMAR. As you're probably well aware, we work closely, the IAIS works closely with other standard setting bodies and the FSB, and that's across the spectrum of not just related to this work, but across the spectrum of our work. And for obvious reasons, we want to ensure good coordination. We want to be collaborative and to share information. All of that helps to create consistency, of course, where it's relevant, where it's appropriate. And this is certainly the case, as you noted, with respect to the IAIS's work on operational resilience. Because it is a common area of interest among standard setting bodies. So I would say more specifically, we're members of the FSB's cyber incident reporting work stream and third-party outsourcing work stream. So we coordinate closely with the BCBS and IOSCO. And as you noted, you referenced the ORTF. That task force is exploring, through the development of an issues paper, the challenges faced by insurance supervisors on assessing the effectiveness of insurers' cyber resilience frameworks, and in particular, the utility of various cyber testing tools. I think I mentioned earlier that the issues paper will also explore supervisory challenges and approaches to managing growing concentration risks with IT third-party outsourcing. This has become a critical challenge over the past few years due to its systemic nature, to its increased complexity in the financial sector, and the increased reliance on technology experienced before and particularly during the pandemic. I should also note that the issues paper will also elaborate on how business continuity planning and management has evolved during the pandemic with relevant interactions to both cyber resilience and to third-party outsourcing. So the plan is to launch the consultation on the issues paper in Q3, and we will look forward to continuing to engage with you on each of these topics. Thanks, Mary Frances.
Okay, sorry, I had some issues activating my microphone. So it's a bit like the virtual world, but now in real life. No, thank you very much, Mary Frances, for that question. What I'll be able to tell you today is of course, mainly based so far on anecdotal evidence. I hope to give more insights based also on hard evidence, on quantitative figures, once we publish our GMR special topic on cyber risk. But as I highlighted before, we're still gathering the data, we're still analyzing the data. So in that sense, we're not there yet. So what do we hear from our members? What do we hear from you as stakeholders in terms of cyber risk? Is that we currently observe it's quite a hard market, also driven by a rise in ransomware claims. As a consequence, we notice elements such as increasing premiums. We also see that insurers are deploying more and more risk mitigation techniques and strategies, which is of course a good thing. We see how coverages are lowered in this sense. We see how insurers try to make sure that they are not confronted with silent cyber coverages. So more and more trying to carve out cyber risk from other policies and explicitly put it in standalone cyber policies. We also see how deductibles are increased. Also interesting to notice, maybe to a bit of lesser extent, is we see how insurers are changing their terms and conditions of their cyber policies. And this is to take into account actually the differences that they notice in the parties that they insure. And these differences are determined by the type of industry that is insured for the cyber risk, also determined by which IT vendors do you use as an industry player. And last but not least, on the cyber hygiene itself of the insured companies. In terms of reinsurance, we do more or less see the same picture. Of course, additional to that, we also see that reinsurers are confronted with higher than normal natural catastrophe claims coming out of 2021. So, as we know, these types of markets are often characterized by cycles. If this would be the case here, it's still hard to say where we are in the cycle right now. We do have some hope that if you look at the higher premiums, also taking into account what's happening in terms of ransomware, that we may be reaching the peak of the cycle. Now, the evolution of cyber risk and of cyber threats in general depends, of course, on many factors. We've highlighted already today. There is the Russian-Ukraine war going on, and there is a fear of a rising number of cyber attacks and ransomwares. So far, we have not yet seen this increase in attacks, but it's important to notice that we'll keep monitoring that situation also at the level here of IAIS. So I'm going to stop there because I definitely do not want to deprive you of the pleasure of following our cyber panel, which is also scheduled as part of this seminar, and where we will get undoubtedly more insights than what I'll be able to give you here right now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dieter. And then the last question we have before we open up to the floor is from our partners at the International Actuarial Association, and I think Roseanne Harris, the IAA president. Over to you. Thanks, Roseanne.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. I'm Roseanne Harris, president of the International Actuarial Association for 2022, and contributing another South African accent to the proceedings today. Thank you again for this opportunity to be part of these discussions. As the global association of the actuarial profession, we have a clear public interest focus, and one of the areas that we are currently working on is coordinating the key learnings from COVID-19 from across the global actuarial profession in order to support building resilience with respect to pandemic risk. So my question is, as we emerge from the pandemic, we're aware not only of protection gaps with respect to mortality and morbidity, but also income protection and business interruption covers. So how do we measure our success in addressing these gaps ahead of further pandemic risks emerging? And how do we monitor, hopefully, these narrowing gaps that have become apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Roseanne. So we will hand from one South African via another South African to another South African, Suzette, to answer that question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, and thank you for the question, Roseanne. Just to say, can you believe Jonathan makes me and you work on a South African public holiday? But anyway, so Roseanne, the IAIS will soon publish a Secretariat draft note on one element of the protection gaps, focused on the role of supervisor in addressing protection gaps caused or accentuated by the pandemic. Now, this note draws on input from a number of IAIS member jurisdictions, and particularly focus on the role of supervisors and how they can play a role in the multi-stakeholder approaches between public and private partnership. In my view, the lessons learned and the observations in the paper could easily be extended to the other areas and possible future work and protection gaps such in the cyberspace, those mentioned by yourself, and climate risk. We are also considering adding some further focus and work on financial inclusion, sustainability, and closing protection gaps in our upcoming 2-year work plan. On your point on measurement, that's extremely difficult to measure that directly and what the impact is on narrowing the protection gap. So the IAIS focus is in providing appropriate guidance to its members so that they are well equipped to contribute to achieving these objectives. As you're well aware, and coming from where I'm coming from, protection gaps are an issue particularly relevant to the MDE jurisdiction membership, and the IAIS, together with the support of the implementation partners, provides capacity building and platforms for peer exchange and supervisory exchanges. And we believe that these platforms for the members would help the members to assess their progress and leverage on shared experience to develop their markets, but also to observe the IAIS standards. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Suzette. Good. Well, we have a bit of time left, so let's open it up to the floor. I've already noted a very keen hand in the front row, so let's give an opportunity to our former Secretary General to ask a question as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. And before asking questions, please allow me to say a few comments, what I have observed for the last few days. It's totally, transformed the association. I'm very impressed. First of all, Vicky, you started today, we are harmonious. And I'm very impressed that the last few days, in spite of some difficulties, in spite of some contentious issues, you did excellent job, Vicky, you mentioned you canceled meeting that you planned in July. And the spirit of association is harmony in diversity. And you really embody this harmony in diversity. And this is a culture of the association, and I really admire what you have achieved for this culture, maintain and enhance this culture. Second, elaboration with commitment. All you guys are very busy in your own jurisdiction's work, and all the secretariat also are very busy, but you produce excellent paper and discuss so intensively for public goods. And also, it's very, very impressive. Particularly, as Jerry, you mentioned, Secretariat, Jonathan, of course, I'm very attached to the Secretariat, but Secretariat is so hardworking behind the scene and support all the EXCO members and members. They are so excellent, and you maintain this good teamwork and support all members and stakeholders. For example, this meeting, extremely seamless. Of course, Croatian invitation was excellent, but Secretariat support is impressive. And Jonathan and Secretariat team, I really thank you to lead Secretariat, such an excellent job. Third, evolution, a very consistent evolution. We are constantly moving up, and you keep this spirit. Today, of course, as Vicky and Jonathan and all the members spell out all the important activities, not only very important one, ICS and horizontal framework, but also all important like Petra's fintech, or hopefully this protection gap and this climate issue and so on. But also I just want to stress, which is not so flashy, but for last few years, you have done excellent work for Peter and Suzette, comment that implementation side, it's not so well recognized or acknowledged, but it's extremely well done in spite of huge limited resources constraint. That's very, very impressive, and it's really, this implementation assessment side is transformative. And of course, market conduct and so on, Jerry mentioned, is a green field, and you touch all those fields too. So those, constant evolution is very, very impressive. So my question, my question is, Vicky, we are so excited with this sort of not face-to-face, not Zoom meeting. And I heard, next, of course, we maintain this, but of course, we have to keep a balance of CO2 emission and so on. But I really hope that, you maintain good balance of face-to-face meeting, like global seminar, as well as, Zoom meeting. But hopefully, you maintain this in-person meeting culture, That's definitely important for all stakeholders. So just I want to ask, how do you maintain good balance between the two? Thanks.
Thanks very much, Yoshien, for the extremely kind remarks that you made, and for your continuing support of the IAIS that you personally did so much to build. So on in-person and virtual, we actually have done some work which has been led by Mike Constantine, the CEO of the NAIC, on actually precisely that question, how to maintain the balance between virtual and in person. There is the good things about virtual as well. Environmental issues, it is the emissions that we collectively must have spent to get us to this paradise are quite considerable. Cost issues, not every member of the association has the same kind of capacity to spend on meetings. Also, broader inclusion issues, also with stakeholders. There's some associations that are better funded by others, certain companies that are better funded than others. So all of these factors speak more towards virtual. But then the other bit is twofold. It is an association that also delivers networks. And networks are very, very important, because if you've been a supervisor for a long time and you're supervising particularly a firm that operates across border, you really benefit if you know in person the right people. Also, if you're writing standards in your own country and you want to immediately see how it worked with another country, I mean, all of these contacts are extremely, extremely important to build. And this can only be built in person. So, and also engagement with stakeholders, the industry, consumer organizations, etc., are also depend on relationships, and those are better in person. So to cut a long story short, we are going to be carrying on having in-person meetings, including the annual conference being in person. Next year, we will have a global seminar in person from that. But from the year thereafter, so from 2024, we will only be having the annual conference in person, and we won't be having an in-person big event in mid-year. So that is the plan in terms of engagement. Thanks.
Thank you, Vicky. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I see another question up front here.
Thank you very much. My name is Sogano from the Daiichi Life Japan. I finally removed my mask to ask you questions. Thank you very much for providing me with the opportunity to speak with us. I'd like to make a brief comment on the ICS and the aggregation method. And we agree with the goal of the IAIS to develop a single global insurance capital standard which adequately reflects a wide variety of risks held by IAIGs across jurisdictions. And towards the finalization of the ICS, it is necessary to ensure a level playing field for all IAIGs. We recognize that there are still some concern that the current ICS version 2.0 does not adequately reflect the business characteristics or risk profiles of the IAIGs in the United States, and the aggregation method is being developed as a solution to this issue. If the IAIS determines that the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes to the ICS in the future, insurance companies competing in the same US market will be assessed on different standards depending on whether their group headquarters is in the US or outside the US. This may lead to different minimum capital levels, charging additional capital costs only to companies adopting the ICS. In this case, we wonder whether a level playing field is still ensured or not. It would be unfortunate if companies presenting their capital adequacy based on the global standard ICS are put at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis those based on the aggregation method. We do hope that the IAIS recognize this potential issue and consider ways not to let it happen. This is not a Japanese-specific issue, but rather a story about IAIGs in any country doing life insurance business in the United States. And just one solution to avoid such a situation, regardless of the jurisdictions in which the IAIG's group headquarters are located, all insurance business operating in the United States should be assessed consistently with the aggregation method for all IAIGs rather than the ICS by using local regulations after applying scalars. In other words, we'd like to see the ICS incorporate a method similar to the deduction and aggregation method permitted under Solvency II. We hope that the IAIS will discuss this issue in parallel with the work on whether the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes to the ICS and provide at least a tentative conclusion at the time of the third quarter 2024 decision on comparable outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vicky, would you like to take that?
Thanks for the question. First, I should remind everyone that we do have an ICS panel, which is the last panel of the global seminar tomorrow before lunch. So we are obviously going to have more questions in ICS on this issue. I mean, the question that you set out is one that to some extent includes a hypothetical. And the hypothetical is that for some reason, the aggregation method will not produce comparable outcomes to the ICS. However, we don't know that. Indeed, I hope that it does produce comparable outcomes. I don't know, because we haven't yet done the technical assessment work. So our focus at the moment is actually to improve the ICS, which will become the insurance capital standard, the single international capital standard, and to come up with criteria, and that's why we launched the consultation yesterday, and we're going to finalize on the back of the feedback that we received the criteria by the end of this year. And next year, we're going to be carrying out the assessment, the technical assessment, to see whether the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes. If the two things provide comparable outcomes, then there is a level playing field. If they don't, then at that particular stage, we will need to see what we do. But we're not yet at this particular stage. But thank you for your ideas, which are, of course, very sort of similar to what, for example, the European current framework actually does. Thanks.
Thank you. And Shigeru, would you like to add anything?
Well, thank you. Thank you. My colleague from Daiichi Life made some comments, so I think I should make some comments as well on this. But I support what's just Vicky mentioned. What is important here is to successfully agree on the comparability assessment. And I think that is our top priority as the IAIS to move forward. Of course, we do not know how it will go from here, but I would think that we would be prepared as a Japanese authority to discuss this with Daiichi Life if you have any concerns on this. But I think in the end, how Vicky put it is, I think, the most, constructive and sufficient response. Thank you.